When his friends asked him how many women he had had in his life, he would try to evade the question, and when they pressed him further, he would say, "Well, 200, give or take a few." The envious among them accused him of stretching the truth. "That's not so many," he said by way of self defense. "I've been involved with women for about 25 years now." Divide 200 by 25 and you'll see it comes to only 8 or so new women a year. "That's not so many, is it?" But setting up house with Teresa cramped his style. Because of the organizational difficulties it entailed, he had been forced to relegate his erotic activities to a narrow strip of time between the operating room and home, which though he had used it intensively as a mountain farmer tills his narrow plot for all it is worth, was nothing like the 16 hours that now had suddenly been bestowed on him. I say 16 hours because the 8 hours he spent washing windows were filled with new salesgirls, housewives, and female functionaries, each of whom represented a potential erotic engagement. What did he look for in them? What attracted him to them? Is making love merely an eternal repetition of the same? Not at all. There is always the small part that is unimaginable. When he saw a woman in her clothes, he could naturally imagine more or less what she would look like naked, his experience as a doctor supplementing his experience as a lover. But between the approximation of the idea and the precision of reality, there was a small gap of the unimaginable, and it was this hiatus that gave him no rest. And then, the pursuit of the unimaginable does not stop with the revelations of nudity. It goes much further. How would she behave while undressing? What would she say when he made love to her? How would her sighs sound? How would her face distort at the moment of orgasm? What is unique about the eye hides itself exactly in what is unimaginable about a person. All we are able to imagine is what makes everyone like everyone else, what people have in common. The individual I is what differs from the common stock, that is, what cannot be guessed at or calculated, what must be unveiled, uncovered, conquered. Tomasz, who had spent the last 10 years of his medical practice working exclusively with the human brain, knew that there was nothing more difficult to capture than the human eye. There are many more resemblances between Hitler and Einstein or Brezhnev and Stolvenitz than there are differences. Using numbers, we might say that there's 1 millionth part dissimilarity to 999,999 millionth part similarity. Tomasz was obsessed by the desire to discover and appropriate the 1 millionth part. He saw it as the core of his obsession. He was not obsessed with women, he was obsessed with what in each of them is unimaginable. Obsessed, in other words, with the 1 millionth part that makes a woman dissimilar to others of her sex. Here too, perhaps, his passion for surgery and his passion for women came together. Even with his mistresses, he could never quite put down the imaginary scalpel. Since he longed to take possession of something deep inside them, he needed to slit them open. We may ask, of course, why he sought that millionth part of dissimilarity in sex and nowhere else. Why couldn't he find it, say, in a woman's gait or culinary caprices or artistic taste? To be sure, the millionth part dissimilarity is present in all areas of human existence, but in all areas other than sex it is exposed and needs no one to discover it, needs no scalpel. One woman prefers cheese at the end of the meal, another loathes cauliflower, and although each may demonstrate her originality thereby, it is an originality that demonstrates its own irrelevance and warns us to pay it no heed, to expect nothing of value to come of it. Only in sexuality does the millionth part of dissimilarity become precious, because precious because not accessible in public, it must be conquered. As recently as 50 years ago, this form of conquest took considerable time, weeks, even months, and the worth of the conquered object was proportional to the time the conquest took. Even today, when conquest time has been drastically cut, sexuality seems still to be a strong box hiding the mystery of a woman's eye. So it was a desire not for pleasure, the pleasure came as an extra, a bonus, but for possession of the world, slitting open the outstretched body of the world with his scalpel that sent him in pursuit of women. 10. Men who pursue a multitude of women fit neatly into two categories. Some seek their own subjective and unchanging dream of a woman in all women. Others are prompted by a desire to possess the endless variety of the objective female world. The possession of the former is lyrical. When they seek in women, what they seek in women is themselves, their ideal, and since an ideal is by definition something that can never be found, they are disappointed again and again. The disappointment that propels them from woman to woman gives their inconstancy a kind of romantic excuse, so that many sentimental women are touched by their unbridled philandering. The obsession of the latter is epic, and women see nothing the least bit touching in it. The man projects no subjective ideal on women, and since everything interests him, nothing can disappoint him. This inability to be disappointed has something scandalous about it. The obsession of the epic womanizer strikes people as lacking in redemption by disappointment. Because the lyrical womanizer always runs after the same type of woman, we even fail to notice when he exchanges one mistress for another. His friends perpetually cause misunderstandings by mixing up his lovers and calling them by the same name. In pursuit of knowledge, epic womanizers, and of course Tomash belonged in their ranks, turn away from conventional feminine beauty, of which they quickly tire and inevitably end up as curiosity collectors. They are aware of this and a little ashamed of it, and to avoid causing their friends embarrassment, they refrain from appearing in public with their mistresses. Tomash had been a window washer for nearly 2 years when he was sent to a new customer whose bizarre appearance struck him the moment he saw her. Though bizarre, it was also discreet, understated, within the bounds of the agreeably ordinary. Tomash's fascination with curiosities had nothing in common with Fellini's fascination with monsters. She was very tall, quite a bit taller than he was, and she had a delicate, very long nose in a face so unusual that it was impossible to call it attractive. Everyone would have protested, yet in Tomash's eyes at least, it could not be called unattractive. She was wearing slacks and a white blouse, and looked like an odd combination of giraffe, stork, and sensitive young boy. She fixed him with a long, careful, searching stare that was not devoid of irony's intelligent sparkle. "Come on in, doctor," she said. Although he realized that she knew who he was, he did not want to show it and asked, "Where can I get some water?" She opened the door to the bathroom. He saw a wash basin, bathtub, and toilet bowl. In front of bath, basin, and bowl lay miniature pink rugs. When the woman who looked like a giraffe and stork smiled, her eyes screwed up, and everything she said seemed full of irony or secret messages. "The bathroom is all yours," she said. "You can do whatever your heart desires in it." "May I have a bath?" Tomash asked. "Do you like baths?" she asked. He filled his pail with warm water and went into the living room. Where would you like me to start?" "It's up to you," she said with a shrug of the shoulders. "May I see the windows in the other rooms?" "So you want to have a look around?" Her smile seemed to indicate that window washing was only a caprice that did not interest her. He went into the adjoining room. It was a bedroom with one large window, two beds pushed next to each other, and on the wall an autumn landscape with birches and a setting sun. When he came back, he found an open bottle of wine and two glasses on the table. How about a little something to keep your strength up during the big job ahead? I wouldn't mind a little something, actually, said Tomasz and sat down at the table. You must find it interesting, seeing how people live, she said. I can't complain, said Tomasz. All those wives at home alone, waiting for you. You mean grandmothers and mothers-in-law? Don't you ever miss your original profession? Tell me, how did you find out about my original profession? Your boss likes to boast about you, said the stork woman. After all this time, said Tomasz in amazement. When I spoke to her on the phone about having the windows washed, she asked whether I didn't want you. She said you were a famous surgeon who'd been kicked out of the hospital. Well, naturally, she piqued my curiosity. You have a fine sense of curiosity, he said. Is it so obvious? Yes, in the way you use your eyes. And how do I use my eyes? You squint, and then the questions you ask. You mean you don't like to respond? Thanks to her, the conversation had been delightfully flirtatious from the outset. Nothing she said had any bearing on the outside world. It was all directed inward, towards themselves, and because it dealt so palpably with him and her, there was nothing simpler than to complement words with touch. Thus, when Tomasz mentioned her squinting eyes, he stroked them, and she did the same to his. It was not a spontaneous reaction. She seemed to be consciously setting up a do as I do kind of game. And so they sat there, face to face, their hands moving in stages along each other's bodies. Not until Tomasz reached her groin did she start resisting. He could not quite guess how seriously she meant. Since much time had now passed and he was due at his next customers in 10 minutes, he stood up and told her he had to go. Her face was red. I have to sign the order slip, she said. But I haven't done anything, he objected. That's my fault. And then in a soft, innocent voice she drawled, I suppose I'll just have to order you back and have you finish what I kept you from starting. When Tomasz refused to hand her the slip to sign, she said to him sweetly, as if asking him for a favor, Give it to me, please. Then she squinted again and nodded. After all, I'm not paying for it. My husband is. And you're not being paid for it. The state is. The transaction has nothing whatever to do with the two of us. 11. The odd asymmetry of the woman who looked like a giraffe and a stork continued to excite his memory. The combination of the flirtatious and the gawky, the very real sexual desire offset by the ironic smile, the vulgar conventionality of the flat and the originality of its owner. What would she be like when they made love? Try as he might, he could not picture it. He thought of nothing else for several days. The next time he answered her summons, the wine and two glasses stood waiting on the table. And this time everything went like clockwork. Before long they were standing face to face in the bedroom, where the sun was setting on the birches in the painting, and kissing. But when he gave her standard strip command, she not only failed to comply, but counter-commanded. No, you first. Unaccustomed to such a response, he was somewhat taken aback. She started to open his fly. After ordering Stripped several more times, with comic failure, he was forced to accept a compromise. According to the rules of the game she had set up during his last visit, do as I do. She took off his trousers, he took off her skirt, then she took off his shirt, he her blouse, until at last they stood there naked. He placed his hand on her moist genitals, then moved his fingers along to the anus, the spot he loved most in all women's bodies. Hers was unusually prominent, evoking the long digestive tract that ended there with a slight protrusion. Fingering her strong, healthy orb, that most splendid of rings called by doctors the sphincter, he suddenly felt her fingers on the corresponding part of his anatomy. She was mimicking his moves with the precision of a mirror. Even though, as I have pointed out, he had known approximately 200 women, plus the considerable lot that he had accrued during his days as a window washer, he had yet to be faced with a woman who was taller than he was, squinted at him, and fingered his anus. To overcome his embarrassment, he forced her down on the bed. So precipitous was his move that he caught her off guard. As her towering frame fell on its back, he caught among the red blotches on her face the frightened expression of equilibrium lost. Now that he was standing over her, he grabbed her under the knees and lifted her slightly parted legs in the air so that they suddenly looked like the raised arms of a soldier surrendering to a gun pointed at him. Clumsiness combined with ardor, ardor with clumsiness, they excited Tomasz utterly. He made love to her for a very long time, constantly scanning her blotched face for that frightened expression of a woman whom someone has stripped and who is falling. The inimitable expression that moments earlier had conveyed excitement to his brain. Then he went to wash in the bathroom. She followed him in and gave him long drawn out explanations of where the soap was and where the sponge was and how to turn on the hot water. He was surprised that she went into such detail over such simple matters. At last he had to tell her that he understood everything perfectly and motioned her to leave him alone in the bathroom. "Won't you let me stay and watch?" she begged. At last he managed to get her out. As he washed and urinated into the wash basin, a standard procedure among Czech doctors. He had the feeling she was running back and forth outside the bathroom, looking for a way to break in. When he turned off the water and the flat was suddenly silent, he felt he was being watched. He was nearly certain that there was a peephole somewhere in the bathroom door, and that her beautiful eye was squinting through it. He went off in the best of moods, trying to fix her essence in his memory, to reduce that memory to a chemical formula capable of defining her uniqueness, her millionth part dissimilarity. The result was a formula consisting of 3 givens. 1. Clumsiness with ardor. 2. Frightened face of one who has lost her equilibrium and is falling. And 3. Legs raised in the air like the arms of a soldier surrendering to a pointed gun. Going over them, he felt the joy of having acquired yet another piece of the world, of having taken his imaginary scalpel and snipped yet another strip off the infinite canvas of the universe. 12. At about the same time, he had the following experience. He had been meeting a young woman in a room that an old friend put at his disposal every day until midnight. After a month or two, she reminded him of one of their early encounters. They had made love on a rug under the window while it was thundering and lightning outside. They had made love for the length of the storm. It had been unforgettably beautiful. Tomasz was appalled. Yes, he remembered making love to her on the rug. His friend slept on a narrow couch that Tomasz found uncomfortable. But he had completely forgotten the storm. It was odd. He could recall each of their times together. He had even kept close track of the ways they made love. She refused to be entered from behind. He remembered several of the things she had said during the intercourse. She would ask him to squeeze her hips and to stop looking at her all the time. He even remembered the cut of her lingerie, but the storm had left no trace. Of each erotic experience, his memory recorded only the steep and narrow path of sexual conquest. The first piece of verbal aggression, the first touch, the first obscenity he said to her, and she to him, the minor perversions he could make her acquiesce in, and the ones she held out against. All else he excluded almost pedantically from his memory. He even forgot where he had first seen one or another woman, if that event occurred before his sexual offensive began. The young woman smiled dreamily as she went on about the storm, and he looked at her in amazement and something akin to shame. She had experienced something beautiful, and he had failed to experience it with her. The two ways in which their memories reacted to the evening storm sharply delimit love and non-love. By the word non-love, I do not wish to imply that he took a cynical attitude to the young woman, that, as present-day parlance has it, he looked upon her as a sex object. On the contrary, he was quite fond of her, valued her character and intelligence, and was willing to come to her aid if ever she needed him. He was not the one who behaved shamefully towards her. It was his memory, for it was his memory that, unbeknown to him, had excluded her from the sphere of love. The brain appears to possess a special area which we might call poetic memory, and which records everything that charms or touches us, that makes our lives beautiful. From the time he met Teresa, no woman had the right to leave the slightest impression on that part of his brain. Teresa occupied his poetic memory like a despot, and exterminated all trace of other women. That was unfair, because the young woman he made love to on the rug during the storm was not a bit less worthy of poetry than Teresa. She shouted, "Close your eyes, squeeze my hips, hold me tight." She could not stand it that when Tomasz made love, he kept his eyes open, focused and observant, his body ever so slightly arched above her, never pressing against her skin. She did not want him to study her. She wanted to draw him into the magic stream that may be entered only with closed eyes. The reason she refused to get down on all fours was that in that position their bodies did not touch at all, and he could observe her from a distance of several feet. She hated that distance. She wanted to merge with him. That is why, looking him straight in the eye, she insisted she had not had an orgasm, even though the rug was fairly dripping with it. "It's not sensual pleasure I'm after," she would say. "It's happiness, and pleasure without happiness is not pleasure." In other words, she was pounding on the gate of his poetic memory, but the gate was shut. There was no room for her in his poetic memory. There was room for her only on the rug. His adventure with Teresa began at the exact point where his adventures with other women left off. It took place on the other side of the imperative that pushed him into conquest after conquest. He had no desire to uncover anything in Teresa. She had come to him uncovered. He had made love to her before he could grab for the imaginary scalpel he used to open the prostrate body of the world. Before he could start wondering what she would be like when they made love, he loved her. Their love story did not begin until afterwards. She fell ill, and he was unable to send her home as he had the others. Kneeling by her as she lay sleeping in his bed, he realized that someone had sent her downstream in a bulrush basket. I have said before that metaphors are dangerous. Love begins with a metaphor, which is to say, love begins at the point when a woman enters her first word into our poetic memory.